Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a topic that's been making waves,
Right.
especially in certain corners of the internet,
Mm.
declining intelligence.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at an archived post from the Relevo TV subreddit.
Interesting.
That community is very interested in humanity's potential for, you know, self-destruction, I guess you could say.
Yeah, a little bit apocalyptic in their thinking.
Yeah, so this post dives headfirst into a pretty provocative question. Is declining intelligence a contributing factor to humanity's potential downfall?
Wow, that's a big one.
Yeah, and they're framing this within the context of the Great Filter,
Right, the great filter.
which for those who haven't gone down that rabbit hole is the idea that there might be some invisible barrier that prevents civilizations from reaching those super advanced levels of technology.
Like a wall that we hit
Yeah.
somewhere along the
So
line.
the post suggests that our cognitive abilities, or the lack thereof, might be that wall for humanity.
Fascinating.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty here. Okay.
The source claims that average IQ scores in the U.S. are actually declining
Declining.
after a century of gains.
Really?
Like we were going up and now we're going down.
Huh.
They point to declining ACT and SAT scores as evidence. What do those scores even tell us about our collective intelligence, really?
Well, that's a great question. IQ tests, they're designed to measure certain cognitive skills, problem-solving, reasoning abilities, but they're not a perfect measure of overall intelligence, are they?
Right.
And there's this whole historical trend of rising IQ scores
Yeah.
throughout the 20th century.
Yeah.
It's called the Flynn effect.
The Flynn effect.
Yeah, were we actually getting smarter, or were we just getting better at taking the tests?
Maybe. So we can't definitively say we're getting dumber, but something is shifting,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it definitely seems that way.
And this source isn't shy about pointing fingers. They give this whole list of potential culprits.
Like what?
Things you might expect, like our reliance on technology all the time.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Are we outsourcing our brains to our smartphones?
Yeah.
And algorithms?
It's interesting.
Like if we don't have to remember phone numbers anymore or navigate without GPS,
Right.
do those skills just atrophy?
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a question that neuroscientists are actually trying to figure out right now.
Yeah.
The answers aren't simple.
And it's not just about losing specific skills, but maybe how our brains are adapting to this constant influx of information and stimulation.
Yeah, we're always plugged in.
Yeah. But the source goes beyond just tech. They claim there's a whole cocktail of factors impairing our cognitive function.
Oh, really?
They have this table. That's honestly a little terrifying when you look at it.
Okay.
Opioid addiction, marijuana use disorder, alcohol use disorder.
Wow.
Like a whole roll call of
Yeah.
societal ills.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
So this deep dive gets really interesting because it's not just about pointing fingers at technology or like lamenting these declining test scores. It's about looking at how all these issues are connected
Right.
and how they might be impacting something as fundamental as our cognitive abilities.
Let's take opioid addiction, for instance.
Okay.
The source states that it impacts 3 million people.
3 million people struggling with opioid addiction, and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
It's huge.
Yeah, to put that into perspective. In 2021, opioid deaths in the U.S. were more than 10 times the number of U.S. military deaths in ARA.
Yeah.
The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Wow.
Following 9/11.
That's a striking statistic.
Yeah, it's a public health crisis of just immense proportions.
Yeah, it really is.
And it's a crisis that just ripples outward. I mean, opioid addiction devastates individuals and families, but it also has these far-reaching economic and societal consequences.
Right.
Think about the impact on workforce productivity, on innovation, on the very fabric of our communities.
Absolutely.
It's hard to imagine a society thriving when so many people are battling this really devastating disease.
It's a huge burden.
Yeah, then you've got marijuana use disorder impacting 14.4 million people.
Wow.
And that's based on the most recent data. Even with marijuana becoming increasingly legalized,
Right.
it makes you wonder how these numbers will shift as attitudes and policies evolve.
It's a crucial question, and it's one that researchers are definitely trying to figure out.
Yeah.
We know that marijuana use has increased,
Yeah.
but understanding its long-term impact on cognitive function, especially in developing brains,
Right.
is still an evolving area of research.
And let's not forget alcohol use disorder, which affects 29.5 million people.
29.5 million.
Alcohol, the socially acceptable drug
Right.
that somehow flies under the radar,
Even though it's so common.
despite its very well-documented effects on our cognitive function.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, everyone knows about the hangovers
Yeah.
and the memory lapses, but long-term excessive alcohol use can lead to some serious, sometimes irreversible brain damage.
Scary.
Yeah, it's not something to take lightly.
Absolutely not.
And then there are factors that people might not even think about, like toxoplasmosis.
Toxoplasmosis.
That's the parasite you can get from cats.
right from cats.
Apparently, it's way more common than you might think. The source estimates 34 million people are infected, and it can actually mess with your mental health.
Huh. So your furry little friend
Mm-hmm.
could be harboring a brain-altering parasite.
That's right.
It's pretty wild.
It's fascinating how these seemingly minor infections can have these subtle, widespread effects on our cognitive function and behavior.
Yeah, a lot of people with toxoplasmosis don't even have symptoms. But some studies have linked it to changes in personality
Oh, what?
and increased risk of certain mental health conditions.
Okay, so we've got substance abuse, we've got a brain-altering parasite, and then there's the impact of psychiatric medications.
Yeah, medications.
The source points out that 54 million people were taking prescription medication for mental health in 2020.
Wow.
This speaks to just the growing prevalence of mental health issues in our society.
Yeah, for sure.
And while these medications can be incredibly beneficial and even life-saving for many people,
Absolutely.
it's important to acknowledge that they can sometimes come with side effects,
Right.
including potential cognitive impairment.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it's a complex issue with no easy answers.
For sure.
And then there's the reality that we have a rapidly aging population.
Right.
The source mentions that there are 55.8 million people aged 65 and over in the U.S., and that number is only going to increase.
It's going up.
And with aging comes a natural decline in cognitive function for many people.
Yeah, that's true.
This is a complex area of study, but factors like age-related changes in brain structure and function and an increased risk of certain medical conditions can all play a role in cognitive decline as we get older.
Makes sense.
So we've got substance abuse, parasites, medication side effects, aging, and then you add in these big ones, obesity,
Oh,
air pollution, each impacting 137 million people.
lot of people.
Yeah, it's like we're under attack from all sides.
It kind of feels that way.
And it's not just the smog hanging over cities. Don't forget about the impact of wildfires,
Right.
which are becoming increasingly frequent and severe, releasing all sorts of nasty stuff into the air we breathe.
That's a problem.
And studies have shown that exposure to air pollutants can impair cognitive development in children
Yeah, especially in children.
and potentially increase the risk of cognitive decline in adults.
So it affects everyone.
Yeah, and the source also points to another environmental factor that's often overlooked:
What's that?
lead exposure.
Lead.
This one's particularly alarming. The source estimates that 170 million people in the U.S. have experienced adverse lead levels in early childhood.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
And we know that lead exposure can lead to irreversible IQ loss.
Really irreversible.
Yeah, this isn't just about individual children. It points to systemic failures in infrastructure and public health.
You're right.
It makes you wonder, is this a sign of a civilization hitting its limits?
Yeah, it's a scary thought.
And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, the one we're probably all guilty of: social media use.
Oh, yeah.
With 302.35 million users in the U.S., it's become just inescapable.
It really has.
And it's not just about the number of users, it's about the amount of time people are spending online.
Right, all the time.
Tweens and teens are spending an average of 5 to 7.5 hours per day on screens.
Wow.
It's hard to deny the potential impact that might be having on their developing brains.
It's a whole generation
Yeah.
growing up in a world of instant gratification and these curated online personas.
It makes you wonder how that shapes their cognitive development, their attention spans, their ability to form meaningful connections offline.
It's concerning.
It is.
Researchers are trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
Some studies are suggesting that excessive screen time and social media use can lead to attention problems, decreased focus, and even social isolation, which can all indirectly impact cognitive function.
So we've got this potential decline in intelligence and this laundry list of contributing factors.
Does a lot.
It's a lot to take in. But I think it's crucial that we have these conversations.
Why not?
Because if we don't acknowledge the potential challenges facing humanity, how can we even begin to address them?
You're absolutely right. We need to be aware of the problem. And remember, we're viewing all of this through the lens of the great filter,
Right.
which raises the stakes even higher. If declining intelligence, coupled with all these other challenges, is our version of the great filter, what's that mean for the future of humanity? It's a big
Wow.
question. It's a question that kind of haunts the imaginations of a lot of people.
It's definitely unsettling. But before we spiral into existential dread, maybe you should unpack this whole great filter concept a little more.
Okay.
It's a pretty wild idea.
Yeah, it is. And like any good thought experiment, it forces us to confront some maybe uncomfortable truths about
Mm.
our place in the cosmos.
Okay, so the great filter, in its essence, tries to explain the Fermi paradox,
Right, the Fermi paradox.
which is this puzzling contradiction between the high probability of extraterrestrial life existing out there and the lack of any observable evidence.
Right, it's like, where is everybody?
Exactly. We're looking up at this universe teeming with stars and galaxies, knowing that the conditions for life are probably present on countless planets.
Yeah.
Yet we haven't found a single alien civilization.
Yeah, it's head
It really is.
So the great filter basically proposes that there's some kind of universal barrier that prevents most, if not all, civilizations from reaching a certain level of technological advancement,
Okay.
the kind that would allow them to make contact or leave a lasting mark on the universe.
So it's like this cosmic roadblock. And
Yeah.
the big question is, where is this filter located?
Right.
Is it behind us, meaning we've already overcome the greatest obstacle? Or is it ahead of us, looming in our future?
That is the million-dollar question. And there are a bunch of different theories about what this filter could be.
Like what?
Well, some people think it's an early hurdle,
Hmm.
like the emergence of life itself,
Okay.
or the development of multicellular organisms. Others point to catastrophic natural events, like gamma ray bursts or asteroid impacts
Right.
that wipe out civilizations before they can really mature.
And then there are the theories that hit a little closer to home.
Yeah, the ones that suggest the filter might be something that we create ourselves,
Right.
like nuclear war, runaway climate change, or even something more subtle, like the slow decline of our cognitive abilities.
And that's where this source gets really interesting. It connects these individual and societal challenges to this bigger picture, suggesting that maybe we're collectively sleepwalking towards our own demise.
It's like we're creating our own great filter.
Mm.
This perfect storm of internal and external threats converging at this really critical point in human history.
It's a very sobering thought.
Yeah.
But it's important to avoid falling into a trap of despair.
Yeah.
I do think there's value in confronting this possibility because if we don't acknowledge these potential dangers, how can we hope to navigate them?
You're absolutely right.
So if we accept for a moment that declining intelligence and all these other factors could be leading us down this dangerous path, what can we do about it? Is there any hope?
I believe there's always hope. Human beings are incredibly resilient and adaptable. We've overcome some really incredible challenges throughout history, and I have faith that we can do it again.
So it's not about throwing our hands up in defeat, but about recognizing the urgency of the situation and channeling our collective energy towards solutions.
Exactly.
Hey, everyone.